Perfect. Hey, good to see everyone. So appreciate you all joining. And really, these breakout sessions are just an opportunity for you guys. On the Monday kickoff calls, there's a lot of content that we try to get through, and we're kind of trying to use this as an educational opportunity to share a lot of knowledge and insights on knowledge graphs and geo and the graph and things. But we want to have time for you guys also to ask questions, to showcase the stuff that you're working on, to learn from each other. Because this is going to be a much more fun opportunity if y'all get to meet each other, learn from each other, and we build something cool together. So we're gonna try to send out for the breakout calls, send out the meetings more ahead of time, get it on people's calendars. But yeah, why don't we just go ahead and get started? This is gonna be kind of an informal thing. But would love to see if anybody has anything interesting that they've been working on that they'd want to share with the group, maybe to start. See Santiago turn on his video, which makes me wonder if he's got something.
Okay, we are working to get papers, research papers. We got the economic and finance topic. So, uh, well, at first, we plan to get some papers from ArcSIP, and and we'll try to categorize and everything to get to. Yeah, that's right, arcsip.org. Actually, I think you mentioned that source in the previous call at the end. So, well, our idea is to get the paper as a main entity to track everything from it, and then try to associate it to the different categories or spaces, which actually should be like a field research field or something like that. And remember the exact name. But I was also checking in the Geo browser that there is an example of a paper with just a name and a description. But I was trying to use that as a reference to see how it's organized. In this case, it's in an academic field, which is also in a space in computer science.
Yeah,
So
don't feel limited at all by
no, it was just to
the
know
types
how
that
it
are
will
there.
be like organized in a context.
But basically, sorry to interrupt Santiago, but our concern is like we written down everything, we have a plan, we have everything, but we don't know how to validate it. Who should we ask for validation? If we are doing things correctly, who can we contact that is also working on the academic side to have the same data structure or to discuss that part of that kind of stuff? So that's
Yeah,
basically our main
We are
doubt.
also checking
sure.
that
So,
we are
so
the
this
only ones doing that exact things.
Yeah, so th this is our first time doing this type of hackathon. So, we're learning together. My thought process was that we would have a better conversation about what fields to have and how to structure it once people had a chance to kind of like download the information and see what information is available and then that would inform the conversation on what types we want to standardize on. So that's why we kind of did it in this order. Now, the thought process was that next week we would have breakout calls for each area. So we'd have one just for like education for the academic fields, and everyone who's working on that could kind of discuss, here's what I have, here's what we think the field should be, and try to get to a sort of consensus there. So that was kind of the thought process. And we can already use this meeting as like part of that. So if you have some proposals, I think this is great for us to kind of, go through this process together, see how it goes. So I would love to see like if you've already started ingesting some of the content from the papers, or you've been looking at, certain places and you have ideas for like what fields you want to have, what relation types, things like that. Um, Now's a perfect time to discuss it.
Yeah, we have kind of a general idea of what we want. We already downloaded a bunch of papers, so we know what kind of data we will be have available. So some questions or things that we may get is, well, actually, which kind of properties of types we want to use. But for example, this case I was mentioning, we have the paper type already created, but we could maybe expand with some other properties. I don't know in that case if that's possible to expand in an already existing type.
It is. I also want
just
to.
No, I just sent the document with our initial thoughts, how we are planning
Yeah.
to move forward. That will be easier maybe to discuss it kind of like in the call. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I
we
see
are
it.
more
Really
advanced than we
great.
should be. I mean, we are more advanced than we should be, and we should take a look next week. But just wanted to share in case
Yeah, I like the
it
handle
works for anyone.
or
No,
Discord
this is
just in
perfect.
case.
Yeah, thank you guys for going first. This is really perfect, and it looks like a great document. Does one of you want to share your screens, and maybe you can kind of walk us through the types and the properties that you're envisioning?
Sure. I leave my Discord handle at the top in case anyone wants to contact me so we can discuss that. But just give me a second.
And then I don't think we got him on this call, but I do want to introduce everybody to Arturas. He was on the kickoff call. I pointed him out, who's heading our content and philosophy at Geo, and he's a deep thinker on ontology, how to structure knowledge, and he would be a great person to also bring in if you want a second pair of eyes on anything like this. He's been working with our Geo Explorers on structuring the existing content, and I'd love to make that introduction. But yeah, this looks good. I can see your screen.
Okay, you're seeing the GRC-20 proposal, right?
Yep.
Well,
You could
it's not
scroll. You could zoom in a little bit because
right.
it's the formatting. Yeah, great.
Yeah, actually. Well, we just pointing the academic fields. We propose to get the papers from RCIP, which looks like a good source because it has an API, it has good categories, and it's well organized. And then we're just going to what we think we will have to do to get the data is to have this paper like a main entity, which will have a lot of properties. And we think that we will have to at least have its categories associated to a field, which can be in a space. Then the authors, I think it's a cool thing to have separated, so we can also associate that author to many papers. And then in this case, in the example in Geo browser, the paper is associated to a journal, but RCP is not exactly like a journal. It's more like an archive or something else because it doesn't have the peer review. So it it could be like an archive or some kind of entity with a website and description and all that. Then we can make a relationship that has the ID or URL where you can find it in that archive. So this option to have like properties in the relationship is kind of cool for something like this. I don't know if anyone else is doing something like that.
I love this. This is really awesome. So let's take a few of these, and I'll just provide a little bit of live input if that sounds good. So I love having the paper as a type. One thing here is in the knowledge graph, we try to do just a little bit of standardization. And one of the things that we standardize on is that every entity has a name. And the name is the thing that you see if you're searching, something like that. So sometimes
Okay.
entities, they'll use a word like title, and we try to just standardize on the word name. I think a paper can have a name,
Okay.
and that might be a small thing.
Okay, that's
Abstract
great.
looks great, and for these, we could think about like what native types would we use for the native, fields. So for example, abstract, that can be type text, right? Name
Yes.
type text, so that's good. And by the way, so people know, because maybe we didn't cover it, but any text can actually also be like a markdown. So that's nice too. You can have, an abstract can be like multi-paragraph. You can have bold even if you want, like it's, basically marked down as valid. Now for authors, this one is interesting. So this one, right, we want to have relations. And when I see this, this is looking like it's pointing to an entity of type author. And my initial thought when I'm thinking through the ontology here is, to me, whether or not somebody is an author is almost more a property of the relation rather than the thing itself.
Right.
I disagree. It's an interesting conversation, but like anyone can be an author, right? Because
Yeah, I
you've authored tweets, so now maybe that makes you an author. So I
yeah,
feel like maybe that entity,
I
maybe it's more just a person or a project.
yeah, that's right. I actually saw that there were some posts that had an author that was a person. So I that's something else I wanted to ask. So that's cool you bring it up.
Yeah, so then so I would make that type basically person or project. So that's one thing. When we define relation types, usually, there's an option to add what we call relation value types. And maybe it's a mouthful, but the relation value types, right, are like the possible types that the things you point to might have. And it helps with the user interface, with filtering, with showing relevant things. Because if someone's like they're typing, they want to add a relation, you want to give them a nice autocomplete, for example, right? To give them suggestions of things that they can add. And so when you define the relation value types, what that does is it filters what types of results you show if people are trying to add the relation. So if you say, hey, if someone's adding authors, find or create autocomplete, show them like the relevant as they're typing projects or people, right? That helps them more quickly find an author, right? You don't need to, add authors like cheeseburger isn't going to be one of the like, options you're going to want to choose, right? So that's kind of the relation value types. And so, yeah, I think person or project, this is a good other thing to name. So I'm just going to, as we go, I'll just kind of share different interesting details. But we've standardized on the term project for the broad category of organizations. And that might be
Okay.
an interesting choice. It doesn't work in every case. Organization or org is actually the correct, most general way of describing any type of like organization. The problem I feel is that it's too nerdy of a word almost. Like organization is very long. And if you're always talking about organizations and like org, it's too just like cut off and weird. Project to me, for most cases, is the most natural signing, right? Like just a natural way of talking about like the graph is a project, you know, even art like archive is a project. So we just use project. It's interesting. I'm curious as people go through during this hackathon, any thoughts people have on that. But that's why when I say that, the author can be a person or a project, that's kind of what we're referring to there. Um, cool. So release date, that makes sense. Now, what we call that generally, we have a term that we use in a lot of places so far, which is uh, published time, I want to say. Let me find this. But that's like a good one, for example, where it makes sense to standardize. And so I'm going to look, for example, at like news, and actually it's the same thing as like news. So it is actually published date is what we have, and we might rename that. But
Okay.
the good thing is that because we reference the attributes by ID, we can always kind of change the names if we want to in the future. But there is already a property that we use for that, and that's published date is what it's called right now.
Okay.
So you feel like, right, that's the same thing as this property, right?
Okay. Yeah, another thing that these papers have in Archive is they have like a updated date, like last updated at. So that one maybe I should also add it here, but I think that well that could be also a property or just a primitive date, but
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So we are looking to add automatically something that's like a last updated at, that's like a system level thing. That's a more advanced feature. I guess what we're talking about here is something where you would manually set it because it's not about like when it was updated necessarily, let's say on chain, and it's more about
Mm.
like, mapping to a record that exists off chain, right? That you just want to match with the information that you
Yes.
have about like last updated. So,
Actually, it could also be like in the relationship because it's what's the that update date. I mean, when was the last date that was updated in this archive?
right, exactly. So that's quite interesting. So I do wonder if you'd want necessarily just the last updated, or more precisely, whether you want like change history or something like that. Right, you could have kind of so each one maybe would even point to, like, because each one could have like what changed, right? Almost some sort of like a diffs, like there's kind of like definitely an entity for each. I don't know what you'd want to call that, but essentially it's like a version. So it could be like, here are the versions.
Yeah,
Now,
that's right. But
yeah,
it will possibly be like the same, but the difference will be in the document you download because this will only have like the abstract and title. But yes, yeah, I like the idea to have like a history. I don't
mhm.
know if in this specific case, but yes.
Yeah, it's for this hackathon, we can keep things simple. I do think it's great to think about some of these things and to start to have an idea in mind of like how things can evolve. But I also think our goal shouldn't be to overcomplicate things, because even having something relatively simple that's done well will already be like a great start. We can feel good about it at the end of, these 5 weeks. Um, so, and then I love the idea, yeah, of the archive. And it is interesting, your point that, because previously we were talking about like journals, and it's a good point that there's different types of, I don't know if it's even do you know if if Archive is the same as a publisher, or it's not even a publisher?
I'm not sure. I don't think it's a publisher because like anyone can send a project, paper. They do review it, but it's not like an exhaustive review.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it's a good source, but not as good as an actual journal or a publisher.
Yeah, so archive could be a great term for that type. So that's a good find. And then the last thing here that I'm seeing is there are different ways to name some of these relations. It is a very graphy thing to have like more of like, here you have created by, and that's interesting. What we do right now, it's not as common, but well, I guess in a sense, because you do have authors as the property, and then you have, right, it says created by on the edge. And what we do is basically that property name is like the name of the edge.
Yeah,
So what we basically say kind of authors. Now there's interesting stuff we still need to do
yeah,
on.
author and person.
Yeah, exactly. So I think so that's how we're doing it now. So other than that, this all looks great. So then the last thing, and then I think that's probably a good coverage of this project, is categories. And this is a really interesting thing because um in different places you maybe want to name it slightly differently. Category is obviously like a very common word that's used to describe categories of things. There's a few others that are sometimes used for similar things. So another one, it would be, for example, tags. There's slight differences between categories and tags, but like some systems will use like tags to categorize things. Here we have categories. And then another one that we use a lot, and this is the one that we mostly use actually, is topics.
Okay.
And again, depending on the domain, the different word might seem more relevant. But in a lot of the things we tend to that we deal with tends to be a little bit more informal, and we usually call them topics. But it's interesting here. So when you say categories, do you know, is this a term of art in the academic world when you publish a paper? Or
I'm not actually sure. I know that in the API query, I have to specify a category, but for me,
So
topic
that's like what
sounds
Archive
better.
calls.
So
So you're saying that like Archive calls it a category in their API.
yes, they have like a link with nomenclature.
Yeah, but I think that what you're saying, Johnny, is more related with the keywords or the keywords of the paper. That is something that we didn't consider that I think that we should add. That category is only going to be one, but keywords or tags or whatever is something part of a paper that we need to add in this.
Yeah, that could be too. Yeah, so that could be interesting. Yeah. So far, we may have a place where we've done keywords. I can't remember off the top of my head. That may or may not also be different from tags. So I think this is a good, area to just kind of consider. I don't know the answer yet, but I think it's a good starting point to this conversation of categories versus topics versus tags. And maybe as people explore, for example, other publishers or other data sources for academic fields, we can see if everybody uses the term category or if, there's different words that different systems use. That'd be an interesting thing to observe. Cool. And then those obviously should be relations, right? So those should be entities, and then you're pointing right to the specific relation or to that category entity as opposed to using something like a text or a string for
Right.
that. Yeah. Cool. This looks really great. So yeah, looks like you guys are off to a great start. What I would say at this point, uh, we don't want to say that we've finalized on any types. I think next week will be a time for us to try to align on types that are published to the knowledge graph, and then we'll try to get people to align on those. But this is a very useful input when it comes to education and academic fields on the ontology. So great work, guys.